Hi, I'm Frank Novak, and nothing gives me greater pleasure than when we take our point of reference program on the road, especially when we're dealing with wonderful cars which are rolling fine art. Here we are in beautiful downtown Newburyport during their Yankee homecoming days, and we're broadcasting through Newburyport Community Media Hub. We've got a lot of great cars here. You can hear them behind me, and you'll see them as we go ahead and go through a lot of this rolling fine art. So join me, if you will. 1957 is the year. Standard of the world is the slogan. And who does it belong to? Cadillac Motor Company, a division of General Motors. And this is a great example of that in 1957. If you take a look at the massive bumpers over here with the bullets that come out and the amount of chrome. You have more chrome on the front bumper of this car than probably you'd have on 10 cars present day. If you take a look at this, this had the windswept type of design coming from the side with these special accents here. And this is a Cadillac Eldorado, which is the best of the best, and a Biarritz to note, which is the highest level that you could get for this car. You've got the wire wheels, you've got the wide whites over here, and that's a definitive white wall. People might wonder, what is that, a wide white wall? Well, that's an example of that. These cars were floating living rooms. Very, very, very plush, a very soft ride, a very, very heavy car too. And you had an engine to power it, which was very powerful and was not extremely economical, but very powerful, so much so that many times hot rodders, after a car of this type had been involved in a major accident or totaled, hot rodders would take those engines, which are highly coveted along with Lincoln engines, and put them in super stock hot rods. But it's great to see this car totally intact and totally original. You can see the chrome accent pieces here. Remember, 1957, many people figure the fins, the period of the fins, well, here's an example of that. Many people think of the Cadillac in 1959 with the largest fin in the two bullet lights that came out from there. Well, that was going to be just 2 years later. This is a completely different body style from the 1959. And back in those days, when major car companies wanted to change a design, they made a major change. Right now, that's not really the case. You'll see a car design oftentimes hold firm for about 3 years, sometimes 5 years, or even more. But this was a standalone period, 1957 Cadillac Eldorado. Take a look at this trunk as it sweeps down with the special inlaid bumpers here, which was particular, I believe, only to this car, with the inlaid license plate in this spot with the swept down trunk. A very, very nice example of rolling fine art from the Cadillac Motor Company division of General Motors. Jaguar, when they had their sports cars, they were highly coveted and very, very well thought of when you take into account the types of racing heritage that they happen to have, from the 120s and the 140s XKs. This car, when they decided to change the body style, even the owner of the company was not too thrilled with the change in the body style to of the XK 140s to the XKEs, because he thought it might be too modern. But as it turned out, it became phenomenally successful and very, very popular. So much so that when this car design debuted at the Paris Auto Show in Europe, in France, that Enzo Ferrari himself is quoted as saying that this is the most beautiful car design he's ever seen in his life. And that's high praise coming from the grandfather of the Ferrari, from the Ferrari business and Ferrari racing. When you take a look at this car, this is how this XKE evolved. This is a V12 version. Originally, this car came in with a six-cylinder, an inline six-cylinder that was highly tuned and very, very fussy. The interesting thing they say about the early Jaguars that had the six-cylinder engines is that while they may have had similar cubic inches of other like-kind sports cars, they had twice as many moving parts in there as the other cars did of a comparable engine size, and consequently they became much more finicky and had that type of reputation. This car evolved from the inline six, I believe, to the V12. A lot of power, but that power was offset by the pollution controls and things of that type that were required to be accommodated when you imported a car to the United States. One of the other things that they did was necessitate having these rubber bumpers on the front of the car, which I can tell you without hesitation are hated in Europe. And when a car like this is perhaps purchased in the United States and sent to Europe, one of the first things they tend to do is take this off. Take these off because they think it doesn't flow with the lines of the car. You might have to agree with them, but then we're talking about the safety issue too, and I believe these were supposed to accommodate 3 to 5 mile-an-hour bumps that would supposedly not cause damage to the chrome or to the hood, which on the other hand makes sense when you take into account the cost of body work. When you take a look at the side of this car in the profile, you'll see how this light came down this way. Racing, they would have these covered. Sometimes for special racing, they'd have wire mesh over these as well. But when you take a look at these, you see the wire wheels, which were pretty much standard. Then you have the louver top. This whole front of the car, in order to gain access to the engine, if this hood were open, this entire portion of the car would go forward. So you'd have total access to the entire engine right here. It's very interesting that Corvette and General Motors took a cue from Jaguar perhaps when in 1984, the 1984 Corvette, which was a completely different looking car, but a two-seater sports car nonetheless, in order to gain access to that engine compartment, their car also had the whole hood and front end lift forward and forward and up. So you got complete access to the engine. When you take a look at this cockpit, this happens to have an automatic transmission. Most Jaguars that are highly coveted come with the 4-speed transmission. And given the fact that this is a very, very slim type of a cockpit, I've driven a car like this, not a V12, but it was an inline 6. And when you sat in it, it was like putting your hand in a glove. You became one with the car. And as you were going through the gears, I swear, it sounded like a growling cat, hence the name Jaguar. You take a look at the back of this, these Jaguars came in basically 3 versions. There was the convertible, there was the coupe that came back this way, and then there was the 2+2, which had the coupe extend a little bit further and then come back. The interesting thing about the coupes, we can't show you that here, this trunk, if you were to open this, would open this way. But, as I understand, if I recall correctly, when you had the coupe, the door would not open up like a hatchback, it would open up like a regular door. Hence, these are some of the differences and small idiosyncrasies of a Jaguar. You saw the 3 to 5 mile-an-hour bumperettes in the front of this car. Here they are to the back of the car. But what a fine example. And I can't say for sure what color this is, but let's just call it British Racing Green, Jaguar XKE. Okay, now we're going to talk about how basic can also be beautiful. And what I mean by that is this, an example with this 1955 Chevrolet 210 Post Coupe. Now, at a distance, this car looks like it's stock until you get a closer look at it. When you get a closer look at this, I'll tell you one thing for sure that you didn't have as stock in 1955 is this cutout with this blower unit coming out of the engine compartment. This is a 383 crate engine, which means it was ordered specially and installed in this car. Based upon what this car may have had before, may have been a 6-cylinder, it may have been a 265 cubic inch V8, but we don't know. But what it has now is a high output 383 cubic inch motor with a blower unit, and this is going to translate into a lot of power. And if you ask me from a standpoint of economy, I can't begin to tell you how many feet per gallon this car happens to get. But with that much horsepower and this type of a heavy car, it moves, but at a cost. Okay, when you're taking a look at this is all stock in the front here. When you take a look at these bumpers, this grille, truth be known, this was one of the most popular cars in 1955. And General Motors knew this. And in 1971, when they tried to launch the 1971 Vega, they wanted to go ahead and establish a kinship and see if they could rekindle and grab that type of popularity back. Because if you look at the front of a 1971 Vega, and you look at the front of a 1955 Chevrolet, the similarities are unmistakable, okay? Now, the fact is you can never really improve on the original, and that's what this is. The Vega had a different story and a different history. You see the special chrome wheels here with the raised letter tires. You see the post coupe that's right here. A car like this in different versions, you've seen this in all black and two-lane blacktop in that movie. You've seen Harrison Ford drive that same type of car in American Graffiti as well. So it's a very highly coveted car based upon the design of the front of that. When you take a look, if Ryan takes a look at the interior of this, you see both bubbles on one end in the driver's side and the passenger side on the dashboard, and that very famous steering wheel. That steering wheel is particular only to 1955 and 1956. And truth be told, that's an easier to handle steering wheel because it's a lesser diameter. That's an aftermarket, because the real steering wheel for this car would probably be maybe an inch or two larger in diameter, very, very large. And when you come back here, you take a look at these, you can see that this rim is larger, deeper for a fatter tire to gain greater traction. If this were originally a V8, you'd see the V right behind here, but this has got the added trim piece that you have here. Now, the upgrade from this 210 model would be a Bel Air, but when you're talking about body style, capability, size, it all comes down to the same thing. But what we have here is a great example of a 55. I'd call this super stock. You can see the trunk is cavernous, comes in and over, and with the bumperettes that you've got here and how you go ahead and flash the ID on your license plate are from two lights from these side bumperettes. Okay, they're decorative, but back in the day when you had another car behind you, or if you were backing into a parking space, and I can tell you, I saw that these bumperettes served as a little bit of a buffer before you got into the body of the car. If you tapped the other guy with these, so you knew you've gone far enough. Back in the day, they didn't have the backup cameras, and they didn't have the rubber bumpers or the vinyl bumpers, which causes people not to hesitate to bump anybody these days. But you never want to do that in a car like this. What a great 1955 Chevy 210. You just saw a red 1955 Chevrolet 210 Coupe. This is also a 1955 Chevy, but in a different body style. They had several body styles in that year. Of course, they had the four-door hardtop, the four-door sedan, the two-door post coupe, the hardtop, the convertible, and a Chevy Nomad station wagon that was a specialty. They had regular station wagons, but this was a special car. Why? Because it was a two-door station wagon. It seemed like an anomaly, but highly collectible and highly desirable and highly stylized. Yes, the front end of this car seems pretty much the same. They've taken off the insignias over here. What they've done instead is they've added the louvers over here, supposedly to dissipate the heat that comes out of the engine, whichever engine size happens to be there. Interesting point though, when you have louvers of this type, as they're grooved into the hood, as they're molded into the hood, that's supposed to give greater structural stability and rigidity to the metal itself. So, factoid for you, there'll be a quiz on this later. You can see the beautiful mag wheels here. These are not stock, but they're aftermarket with the knockoff spinners. The knockoff spinners are more for design. This is a bolt-on wheel. And then you have here this special type of chrome accent piece that comes above the headlight and comes along the beltway of the car. This door is pretty much the same as you'd find on any other 55 Chevy, except when it starts to cruise down this way. It grooves down in this way, and that's particular only to this car. You can see a two-door here, and how do you open the windows? You slide them back. You have the grooves on the roof here. This was not your grandfather's station wagon even back in the day. This was a very stylized car for its time. And right now, the improvements that have been made to it are pretty much mild, but they're super stock. Maybe an engine change, the wheels changed, but the body style in a car like this, you would not want to change at all. You take a look at the back of this, and you can see it has a full back seat behind the front seats, but then this would open up in a very nice manner for this to come down this way and that going up. People think of station wagons or SUVs or crossover vehicles back in the, today. But back in the day, this was the hauler, a car like this. But this was highly stylized, and this one, yes, came with a V8 to begin with because this is the insignia from Chevrolet and has the added bumperette chrome right over here too. What a great example, and it shows the diversity that they used in 1955 for Chevrolet. Mid-year Corvettes are some of the most desirable Corvettes in the world, and mid-year are from 1963 to 1967, where they had the same basic style body style. There were two versions that were allowed. One was the two-seater convertible, the other one was the two-seater coupe. That was the first time Corvette in 1963 did that. They only had, in 1962, the two-seater with the removable hardtop. But they had two choices here on this style of body. Now, this is the last year of the 1963 to 67 Corvettes. And what they did here was basically, they said, to give it a clean style design. And they took any extraneous emblems off of it. In 1963, they had imitation louvers in this. In 1964, they took the louvers out but kept the indentation in. But they took all those out to make it a nice, clean design right here. Now, if you take a look at the wheels, this was the introduction of the rally wheels. Now, these are some of the most coveted wheels that they use in the industry because they use them on all types of Chevrolet and super stock cars. And aftermarket, there's a big aftermarket market for these to put on different cars. And if the bolt pattern fits, then they'll use them because they decided, and it was mandated, I believe, by federal law, that the year before, in 1966, a lot of cars of this type would have the spinners that would stick out, and that you've seen in maybe some of the other cars that we've talked about. The spinners, they said, were a dangerous thing because if somebody was walking by, they could cut themselves or hook themselves on the spinner. So they disallowed that. And what was General Motors going to do? What was Corvette going to do? So they came up with the rally wheel, and they used this rally wheel extensively on a lot of other General Motors products. They used them on Chevy Novas, on Chevelles, on Impalas, on Caprices, for many, many years after that, even on Monte Carlos, in larger sizes and smaller sizes as well. These louvers that you see here are particular to 1967 only, and the interesting point is that in 1967, this car was not supposed to be this design. They were supposed to, what you saw in 1968, which was the Mako Shark design Corvette, which was the first of its kind, that was supposed to debut in 1967, not this car. But they didn't get the adhesive squared away properly enough to be reliable enough to be ready in 1967, so they redid the 1966, cleaned up the lines, changed the wheels, and put these louvers in to differentiate it from the 65 and 66 Corvettes so that it would be somewhat different, and it is. Here's a little hint for you. Take a look at the 1968 Mako Shark Corvette. The one thing that this car shares with that 1968, nothing else in the body style except the same louvers. These are 1968 louvers that they put on a 1967 Corvette. So it'll be our secret. But now you come by and you'll see these are the side pipes that you happen to have here that are very, very popular. If you didn't have these, you'd have the dual exhaust coming through two ports under the valences, under the bumpers to the back. You've got your side mirror here and a wind cutter. Oh my God, these were fantastic. People love these things, but I think around 1969 in the major body styles, in the full-size cars, they said, well, we eliminated this wind cutter to give it a clean design. They gave it a clean design, all right, but they manufactured it. It cost them less money not to put this in, but people love this because this was the first version of air conditioning when you curve the window this way to come in as you're driving along before you turned on the air conditioning, if you were lucky enough to have it. The roof line here is beautiful, and you see how the door is molded into the roof over here. It almost gives it a type of an aircraft quality design, and it's a beautiful version of a design that you've got here. That's why it's so highly coveted now and why it lasted so long from 1963 to 67. And when you take a look at the line of the roof and you see a ridge on the top of this roof, that comes all the way down. This came down to a band in 1963 that came down and continued down to the back window over here. But I believe it was Bill Mitchell and Zora Dontoff both argued about that incessantly because they said this bar in the 1963 Coupe inhibited vision. So what they did was, okay, in 64 through 1967, they took that bar out. But you can see the ridge from the roof and the ridge to the back is still there as it was originally. Truth be told, you're not going to believe this, but many guys that would buy a 1963 Corvette, because it was the same kind of a body style as the 64s or the 65s, they wanted to make their cars look more modern. So what did they do? They bought a rear window, complete size rear window, and they chopped the piece out and put the single chrome piece on the top and the bottom to make it look more modern. Little did they know that the split window Corvette coupes are the most coveted Corvettes of the mid-year design. You can see as it comes back here, you've got the separated bumpers, and if you did not have the side pipes there, you'd have a dual exhaust, one here and one there. Backup light is right here with your gas cap right in the middle. So this is great. It's a two-seater. They've always been two-seaters. You've had space here in the back for your luggage or anything else, but through all of these times, because this is a fiberglass body from 1963 through 1967, you didn't have a trunk to open it up. You have to push forward the seats and put whatever you wanted behind the seats. But anybody that owns a car like this, whether it's a coupe or convertible, never seemed to complain about that.
Okay, you're ready. Good. Here we go.
Now, can you begin to guess which car is associated with the engine that you're looking at right now? As Ryan fades back on this, you'll take a look and you'll say, aha, I knew it. That's right. Back in the 1970s, the early 1970s, Chrysler Corporation's answer to the pony car through the Dodge Challenger and the Plymouth Barracuda, this was one of them. And this was a high-performance version. Why? Because this has got 440 cubic inches. You've got to take into account, this same body style back in the day, you could have ordered this with a slant six-cylinder engine or a very small 318 cubic inch V8 engine, which was extremely bulletproof and drop-dead reliable. But this 440 cubic inch is all business, is all horsepower. When you take a look at the size of this engine, and then you take a look at the profile of this car, it's absolutely incredible because you've got a lot of power on what's a relatively small car, and what that translates to is a lot of speed very quickly. Interestingly, this is the same body style that Chrysler Corporation decided to go ahead and initiate in their retro version of the Dodge Challenger. The Dodge Challengers back in the day and the Plymouth Barracudas back in the day shared the same style body. So they were almost synonymous with one another. This carries the insignia of a CUDA 440, which is basically a pinnacle of power for this type of automobile. You can see the snorkel hoods on this side, which actually are functional. Some are just for show, but this is the real deal. This car looks very sedate and looks unassuming, but when you open the hood or you look at the insignia, you know what's powering this car. You've got the torque thrust wheels, and you've got the clean body style that you have here going along, all the way along the roof line. This is an automatic transmission, probably a Chrysler Torque Flight transmissions, which were extremely, extremely durable. So much so, they were the preferred transmission for the large police cruisers that were used all around the country because they could take a beating, and they certainly did. And it looks like anybody that would own a car like this, as beautiful as it is, with the rear wing and your 440 insignia here, could really put this car to the test. So this is an early 1970s Plymouth Barracuda. The Plymouth company may be gone, but it is not forgotten, will never be when you're looking at a car like this. You saw us just mention the Plymouth Barracuda with the 440. This is the counterpart to that in the Chrysler Corporation that we referred to, and this is the Dodge Challenger. You can see from the profile, it's got the same type of body and roof lines, and it even may have the same engine block. This is also a 440, but what makes this different? It's called a 440 six-pack, okay? What makes it a six-pack? Two barrel carburetors underneath this large air cleaner. And when you take a look at this, you've got the snorkel tubes up here, you've got the 440 six-pack designation on the hood, and then you have its designation here, RT. RT in honor of Road and Track magazine, because it's a highly coveted car, high performance vehicle, and once again, this, if you took a profile of a Dodge Challenger from 2023 and put it next to this Dodge Challenger, they say that as pony cars go for retro design, the new Dodge Challengers are the closest to retro design to these cars, more so than the Mustang or Camaro are to the cars that they're trying to pay homage to. So this is a early 1970s Dodge Challenger Road and Track 440 six-pack. Some people say, let's just do this just for fun. Well, when you say that about automobiles, what can you begin to come up with? Maybe a 1958 Fiat Jolly. Well, if you take a look at this car, it may be the size of a large golf cart, and the fact is, it probably serves the same purpose. It's got the fringe on top, it doesn't have the doors in here, it has wicker seats, no less. So the fact is, this is not a car for New England winters, say the least, but it's a fun car, it's a beach car, and it's just built for one thing, and that's just to have a lot of fun. Not necessarily for durability, not necessarily for mileage, but when you look at a car like this, it's probably a lot of fun to drive, and even if you don't drive it, it'll bring a smile to your face just looking at it. In fact, taking a look at this, you know, if this shade were a little bit lighter, I think Barbie may have owned this car at one time. It's probably her shade. When you think of Porsche, you think of high-performance European sports cars. You don't necessarily think of affordability in the same breath as something of that type. But here's what they attempted to do in 1976 with a Porsche 914. This was lesser priced than the 911, appealed to a wider scope of an audience, and was stylized very, very nicely, but was considered a mid-engine rear-wheel drive type of sports car. You had the flip-up lights over here, where in 1976, 78, the 911s had the regular headlights here. As they went along and you got into the 2000 period plus, these started to move forward and they were sloped. But these pop up, and they're very good. They're a very, very nice rally car, and you can see it's got the Porsche Fuchs wheels that you happen to have here, and this roof is not a fixed roof. It is for, if you want, it's one piece, which makes it good, because it's some of these other style clip-out roofs, if you had a gasket leak in some American and some other foreign cars, you might have a problem during a rainstorm. The red color is like a laser red. It's a beautiful Porsche, but you can see here the venting behind this window, which acts almost as a roll bar too. The venting here is for the engine that's back here. So you see how these fenders are blown wider a little bit to allow for a wider wheel. I think when these cars originally came on the market, these fenders were not as wide. But it's a great car, it's a fun car to drive, and it was more affordable and got people into Porsche that much earlier at an affordable price. That's in the same way when you take a look at some of the Porsches that they have now. If you look at the Porsche 911, if you look at the Porsche Cayenne, these are different versions. You see how things have evolved. But back in the day, this was a Porsche 914. Right now, we've got here a 1960 Chevrolet Corvette. Corvette is billed as America's sports car from 1953 to present day. It's been moving ever since and evolving ever since. This 1960 Corvette came from 1957. They went to 1958 with dual headlights, 59 dual headlights, and this is a 1960 with dual headlights as well. In 1957, they only had a single light. Now they made this body, it's a little bit wider. You've got typically here, you're going to have something like in 1960, you had a 327 cubic inch engine right here, which is very, very nice. You see, because the car was fiberglass, they had this thing over the distributor relative to interference from electrical interference on this car. The interesting thing I'll tell you about this, when you see these side louvers here, and people say, well, that's a Corvette trademark. Very interesting if anybody is a movie fan and you know who Roberto Rossellini is, the famous director, or Ingrid Bergman, the Oscar award-winning actress that everybody knows if you're watching Cary Grant movies. The fact is that Roberto Rossellini commissioned Enzo Ferrari to build a special car for his wife, Ingrid Bergman, which was a Ferrari, and the only Ferrari to have side louvers in the side body style. And it's very interesting. That was the only year Ferrari did that on what they call the Bergman Ferrari style car. And it was the year after that, coincidentally, General Motors decided to employ the very same style side body indentation. If you look that up on the internet, you'll see, just look for the Bergman Ferrari and you'll see that type of similarity. Now, this is a total fiberglass car. This roof can detach. This back portion here flips up so that if you don't have the hard top, the convertible top is hidden behind this plate right here that lifts up so you can put that over. Now, it comes back, folds over on a rounded edge here, and comes down to the trunk. In 1962, in 1961 and 62, the year after this body style, the same was true for the front, for the sides, but when you came to the back, to this area, in 1961 and 62, it ducktailed. It came this way and then went down that way, which is the same style ducktail that they kept in 1963 all the way through 1967. Now, if Ryan takes a look at the profile of this car, I had mentioned Roberto Rossellini and Ingrid Bergman as far as movie stars and the connection to this sort of car, but for television aficionados that like automobiles and like traveling, anybody that likes Corvettes likes Route 66, the TV show. This was the 1960, same type of car that they used when they first started the show Route 66. And this was the very same like-kind type of car. In 1960, when they did film Route 66, they had it in blue. It was a certain type of a blue color. But because they found that filming in black and white caused problems with reflections, in 1961 through 62, 63, and 64, they then had their Corvettes color a little bit of a sand type beige because that played better, and it looked silver on the black and white screen, but it was actually a sand type beige. General Motors is famous for producing a whole host of different style cars and different cars, from Cadillac Eldorados to Chevy Corvettes to even this Corvair, Chevrolet Corvair Monza Spyder. Back in 1963, this was the top of the line for this style car. This was a rear-wheel drive car. It was 6-cylinder. It had, when you open this hood, this was the trunk. That's where you stored things. This was 1963. They changed very, very slightly from 1959 when they came up this far. But you take a look, the lines are very, very nice. This was supposed to be somewhat of the answer for those people that were seeking an economical car that had reliability, that could go well in the snow. And you took a look at this, you can see here's your filler cap, which is in the front fender. You have the wire wheels over here, which are the stock style. And this is the insignia. This is a Corvair, but this is a Monza Spyder, okay? And that denotes high performance. When you take a look at this and you get into the cockpit, you can see it's a rather spacious cockpit with the 4-speed transmission there, and you've got a sizable back seat, larger than what you'd find even in a Mustang. But when you come back here, the real secret to the sauce of this car is the performance that it comes with this engine. And when you say this engine basically tells a story, while you open this up, this is maybe where you'll find the spare tire, but this is also where you're going to find this engine, this 6-cylinder engine. Now, the similarities here, to other car companies that have evolved over time. Number one, Porsche is supposed to have thought this is a great design relative to some suspension issues that this car had that they adopted as being beneficial to their sports car suspension. Also, this is a type of a 6-cylinder engine, not dissimilar from what Subaru happens to use as far as their boxer engine, where the pistons go back and forth against each other, and that's what we have here. Also, this is a Spyder turbocharger, 150 horsepower, and that doesn't sound like a lot, but for a relatively small car, this can go pretty darn fast, especially rear-wheel drive. Now, the reputation of this car was somewhat tainted back in the day when consumer advocate Ralph Nader wrote a book, said unsafe at any speed, and the car he was focusing on was the Chevrolet Corvair, because he said under stress and high intensity, when you made a hard turn, that the front tire could bend itself over and under the car, causing it to flip. Now, I'm not sure if General Motors ever admitted to that, but the fact of what they did do is redesign the front end and redesign the body so that when they got to the mid-1960s, it was a totally redesigned car. It was extremely reliable. Even the suspension level could not be questioned, but the damage was done and they could not recover from that. But it's nice to see great examples of a groundbreaking car still around today. This is a 1963 Chevy Corvair. For those race aficionados that love racing movies and love racing cars, if you've recently seen the movie Ford versus Ferrari, you're in for a treat, because what we've got behind me right now is a 1965 Ford GT40. This is not a replica, this is the real deal. So if you saw Matt Damon playing Carroll Shelby in that movie and the types of cars that they were racing against Enzo Ferrari, this is the type of car that they were racing. This is not a replica, it's the real deal. Not the ones that raced in the movie, but it might as well have been. It is that accurate, it is that exact. With this car, Ford Motor Company, because Enzo Ferrari was to make a deal and sell Ferrari to Ford, but because Enzo Ferrari wanted to maintain control of the racing division of Ferrari, and Ford said respectfully, no, if we buy Ferrari, we buy complete control. It's at that point Ferrari stood up, walked away from the table, and said, nice to know you. After which Henry Ford said, basically, we're going to get that guy, and whatever it takes. And what it took was this car. And when they raced Ferrari at Le Mans, in that epic race that you saw in the movie, they took first, second, third place right across the finish line, with Ferrari only following for probably the first time in anybody's memory. And this is a wonderful car in original style condition. It's a 289 cubic inch engine. The remarkable thing about this car from Ford Motor Company is that the engine block, at being 289 cubic inches, is essentially the same engine block that you'd find in any car that was manufactured in 1965 from Ford at the time. You take a look at the back of this car with the rear end that lifts up, with the engine placed where it is, almost as mid-design to give it proper balance and traction on the field as they went around the corners and on the straightaways. Take a look at the cuts in these doors for how it came up and around onto the roof. When you're looking at the Corvettes and the mid-year Corvettes, you saw how their roofline came this way. This is how this door locks in. When you open this door, you're almost in a convertible status, but you're not. It is a coupe, an enclosed. You can tell we're in a performance center when you hear that type of noise. But when you see a car like this, you're talking everything you need, nothing you don't, and what you're looking at is pure performance. This is the 1965 Ford GT40. Why 40? Because from the ground all the way up to the top, 40 inches tall, hence its name, GT40. We're very fortunate right now to be able to have the owner of this great 1953. Oh, there's high performance in your ears. But we've got a 1953 Chevrolet Corvette. This is when it all started in 1953, when they had their Motorama. And we're very fortunate to have with us the owner, Fred Curley, of this beautiful 1953 Chevrolet. How long have you owned this car?
I've had the car for about 14 years.
We know that you've modified it somewhat because when this car first started and came out in the Motorama, it was a Blue Flame 6.
Triple carb.
With triple carb,
Right.
with an automatic transmission. It had the window curtains.
Right.
And it was basically a bare bones basic. I know some of the cars, some of the, I guess, celebrities that they happened to sell these cars to. One of them was John Wayne.
And he had modified the car because he was so big.
Really? What did they do?
Well, they had to stretch it out.
No kidding.
Because I'm 6 foot even, and I'm not really that tall. But if you notice on the car, the windshield is so low that when I'm sitting in the car, it comes to about right here.
That's great. I get it.
So that's why I have goggles in it, but I don't wear the goggles.
I get it.
It's like a motorcycle, you know?
You know, with a car like this, it was so popular in the Motorama that they rushed into production to be able to get it to move, because this was the answer to the European cars that a lot of the GIs came back from World War II, and they wanted the Triumphs, the Jaguars, and they said, we got to give our own people something, and the answer to that was this.
Yep. And some of the features, like the headlights with the
wire mesh?
wire mesh was off the Porsche. They picked that up off the Porsche.
Really?
And the reason for the wire mesh back here made sense because the roads were so bad to protect the headlights from stones and stuff like that.
Made all the sense in the world. Can you tell me, a car like this, when they first produced it, they all came in white?
White with red interior, no windows, and no door handles.
Which was very similar to some of the European cars back, even the MGAs at the time and MGTCs.
Right.
But the fact is, this is a great car. You've since modified it. You've got a 350 cubic inch in there now. Mm-hmm. And this car must really move based upon the weight of the car.
Well,
since it originally had a 6 and now you got a 350 in there.
That's a big difference. You know, it's almost too much motor sometimes. You have to really, when you step on the gas pedal, it'll burn like crazy. But no, it's got a lot of power. The weight of the car is about 2,600 pounds, 2,800 pounds. So that's a lot of weight.
That is a lot of weight. You know, power to weight ratio.
Power to weight ratio, yeah.
Absolutely correct. You've got a great car here, Mr. Curley.
Thank you, I
and thanks very much for letting us take a look at it.
All right, thank you.
If you take a look at the side of this car, you can see this is 1953. This is when it all started. And you could get any color you want as long as it was white. And it had a red interior. And if you take a look at this, you see the wide whites, you see the hubcaps, and you see the red ring around there. That's the color of the rims, to give it that much more of an accent. But to go ahead and also blend in with the raspberry red type of interior. You don't see any louvers in the side of this car over here because those didn't come until after Ingrid Bergman's Ferrari, which inspired General Motors to include that type of louver, that side cove in the Corvettes. But when you see this, you can see the interior, the automatic transmission mount has been modified from what it was originally, but all of the DNA is still here from an original 1953 Chevrolet Corvette. You come back here, you take a look at this beautiful style lights. They had these for a few years with the exhaust ports coming out through here. Now you would think that a Blue Flame 6 with triple carburetors, which is reputed to be a modified perhaps truck engine for the durability and for the torque and for the horsepower, but the fact is that still wasn't enough for many aficionados that like power and speed, and that's why the owner of this car took that engine out and put in a 350 cubic inch, which makes this car a real screamer. A 1953 Chevrolet Corvette in any way, shape, or form. Very rare, and this one's very beautiful. Like a kid in a candy store, I wish we had access to every car that was here. We didn't, but we got to a lot of them. And there are a lot of wonderful cars, and I'm glad to have shared that experience with you. I hope you enjoyed the experience as well. And until next time, my name is Frank Novak for Point of Reference and the Newburyport Community Media Hub.